Daredevil managed to bring Mr. Fear to justice, but was unable to help his victims. This is all the more tragic, of course, because Matt Murdock is Daredevil, and he's a friend of mine. Today on the Comic Book Report, Daredevil by Ed Brubaker Omnibus Volume 2. Stick around and check it out. Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I've prepared another omnibus review for all of you. We're looking at my favorite superhero character, Daredevil. This is the Daredevil by Ed Brubaker Omnibus Volume 2 reprint. This is the second of a 2-volume set collecting the entirety of Brubaker's run. And yes, the omnibus may be small, but it packs one heck of a punch. Can't wait to get into today's review, but before we do, I want to shout out and say thank you to our channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking to pick up your own comic book collected editions, I highly encourage you to check out their website. You can actually find a link to it in the video description, and if you see anything there you like, you can actually use my discount code at checkout, TheComicBookReport, to save $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's a fantastic way to support this channel. Thank you so much for considering. Now let's get started with today's omnibus review. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written primarily by Ed Brubaker and illustrated primarily by Michael Lark. The comics in this volume were published by Marvel Comics beginning in 2008. The volume itself collects Daredevil issues 106 through 119 and issue 500, along with Daredevil Annual number 1 and Daredevil Blood of the Tarantula. This is an oversized hardcover edition with glossy print paper stock, a sewn binding, and a total of 472 pages. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at that Daredevil Omnibus by Ed Brubaker. I should say this is the standard edition cover. They did release a direct market cover for this printing. I'll go ahead and throw up a quick thumbnail so you can compare. Both prints are really cool. I really like both of these covers. I think that this one I have, the standard edition, I would have loved to see the art extend to the tops of the book, maybe do a wraparound. But even having the shrunken kind of like full page art here, it's still really cool to see. The spine is pretty straightforward, black with a white text. I really like it. We have a little Daredevil head at the bottom. I'm unclear if the direct market has a different image. I know that this printing, the Daredevil font, is a bit smaller than previous printings, but it does line up with the volume 1 that was also reprinted, I think, in the last couple years. As we transition to the back cover, we have thumbnailed snapshots of all the covers of all the issues included in the omnibus. This was a nice feature and a great way just to see at a glance what's included. I mentioned earlier, but this is the back half of that Brubaker era for Daredevil. Really like it. Like I said, a pretty simple dust jacket, but overall does the job. And before we go too much further, I did want to spend one more minute on this dust jacket. I'm going to be showing you the interior flaps, and I'll just go ahead and unfold everything, spread it out so you can see it all at a glance. Again, just to see what you're getting with this omnibus reprint. I think overall, this dust jacket for me wasn't remarkable, but it was serviceable. I really still enjoyed it. I think the art we did get on it is pretty solid. The thumbnails on the back all look great. No serious complaints from me. However, as we transition away from the dust jacket and look at the art that's printed on the hardback book itself, that's where this reprint really shines for me. We have a gorgeous art print wraparound printed on the hardback book itself of Daredevil, kind of stylized, maybe screaming or in battle mode, and it just looks amazing. Honestly, when I first got a peek of the book itself under this dust jacket, I was elated. I just think it looks fantastic. It's one of my favorite art on board prints we've had in an omnibus in some time. Absolutely gorgeous. And now that we've examined the exteriors, I want to go ahead and transition for a few moments to look at the binding. As I said, I believe this is a sewn binding. My copy laid flat really well. I don't know if it's because of the smaller page count, but I found this binding to be excellent. A little bit of gutter loss, but things did open up quite nicely. I have no real complaints here. Overall, I think this volume was very well bound. Again, I've already heard people online complaining about the size of this omnibus, and I understand, but for what we're getting, it's still a really well-made book. And speaking of book, it's finally time to dive into the book proper. So as we make our way in, we have a great kind of title page, creator page that shows who worked on the book, things like that, publication information. But then we're also given a kind of previously on Daredevil. It's a one-page blurb that basically sets the stage for everything that happened before in the pages of the Ed Brubaker run on Daredevil. Why this was exceedingly helpful for me is actually I started with the volume 2. Yes, I've read this entire run, but it's been about a decade since I've revisited the Brubaker run of Daredevil. So I got this volume 2, I was excited to jump in, I debated, do I try to get volume 1, do I read my paperbacks and try to catch up, but ultimately I saw that previously on and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to jump right in, and it really worked for me, and it honestly gives me hope for people that maybe just find the volume 2 in print and are unsure whether they want to jump in. I think you can read this by itself and still really enjoy it. I think that it gives you the information you need. Sure, if you've read the runs leading up to this, it'll enrich your experience a bit, but that previously on really does help to set the stage. Without going into too much detail, essentially at the end of volume 1, something really tragic happens in the life of Matt Murdock. This is a little bit of a spoiler for book 1, but it is a plot point that's done throughout this volume, so I'm going to talk about it briefly. Okay, here we go. At the end of Volume 1, Matt Murdock's wife, Mila Donovan, is subjected to a toxin or some kind of thing from Mr. Fear, one of Daredevil's villains, and it's basically put her into a state of kind of psychosis. She's in sort of an asylum, and it's kind of ruined her life. And Daredevil was able to subdue Mr. Fear, but now his life is kind of in shambles. He's a shell of himself. He's completely isolated, shutting people off, and that's really where we start this volume. It's a really great turning of the page, next chapter. So I think that the way they broke up these two volumes of the omnibus make a ton of sense. And honestly, it's a great jumping on point if you were to start Brubaker's run anywhere but the very beginning. I think honestly, this is where to do it. Now, I will say, I will address kind of some controversy I've already heard on social media and online. A lot of people said these omnibuses are so small. Both of these Brubaker books are right around 500 pages, give or take. And a lot of people are saying this was a run that could absolutely have been condensed into one single omnibus to have the entire run in one book. Why didn't Marvel do this? They reprinted. Why didn't they just try to make it into one book? I'm sure there's some economic reasons for that. I get it. I understand. Honestly, Marvel has made omnibuses now that are well over 50 issues. You absolutely could have done that here. But I really hope that doesn't sour people who are omnibus collectors who maybe have always wanted to check out this run, because it's still a fantastic format. Both of these reprints for these books are really stunning, and it is such a wild ride. And honestly, if I'm frank about it, it's been a while since I've read an omnibus this thin, and I was really comfortable reading this book for the week I was reading through it. Anyway, I've addressed it. We're going to go ahead and move forward. So in the beginning, like I said, Matt Murdock, Daredevil, is absolutely devastated. He's kind of a shell of his old self, and some of his colleagues from the law firm are trying to get him kind of back in the saddle. And one of his co-workers basically tries to suggest there is someone on death row who needs kind of a lawyer, needs someone to help exonerate him because she believes he might be wrongfully imprisoned and now he's about to get the death sentence. Little does Matt know, though, that this is all just a pretense to get him out of the house and practicing and trying to do some real good after the horrible events that happened with his wife. But Daredevil really does stumble onto something. Matt Murdock really does catch wind of something insidious going on with this wrongfully imprisoned person. So that leads into this kind of tale of mystery and intrigue. We have a lot of the supporting cast of Daredevil, especially at the law firm, involved throughout this run. There's a good deal of just violence and just interesting character dynamics and moments. I honestly really liked it. I thought it was a great storyline and a great way to get Matt back in costume, back on the streets, and trying to find his own brand of justice. Bubbling too in the beginning of this volume, we have Matt kind kind of falling for one of his girlfriends at this law firm, even though he is married. Granted, it is to his wife, who has been completely institutionalized, but we have a moment for him where he kind of falls victim, or chooses to give in to his passions, rather. And it's a moment that, once again, we have Matt making some poor life decisions with the women in his life. It leads to so many complications down the road with this book. I won't go into too much of that, but that is something that happens throughout this. And I should probably note there is a scene of kind of sexuality, partial nudity, nothing too crazy, but I will advise on that for people that are trying to avoid any of that content. I know I'm pretty sensitive to that myself, and it's right on the line, but not too bad. This book also has a great deal of violence, some profanity, so again, kind of reader discretion advised as far as the age range that's going to be picking up this run. In general, this is a much darker, gritty, kind of crime-driven run on the book. It's Ed Brubaker, who's done so much of that stuff over in a lot of his independent work. Absolutely find it here. I honestly think the tone we get for Daredevil in the Brian Michael Bendis and this Ed Brubaker era, this is like my flavor of Daredevil. I love what these two writers were able to do. It really struck a chord with me, and I think it just feels more pitch perfect to this character, or at least how I imagine him in my mind. Anyway, so we do have all that happening. We have a lot of just interpersonal problems going on for Matt Murdock's life, in particular with the women in his life, and how he navigates all of those dynamics and the fallout of his, poor choices. With that, though, we also have him coming into contact with the Tarantula, who is out of prison and is trying to reform his life, but he can't really shake his past, his family life, and just kind of the cycle of violence he finds himself caught up in. But we have him as kind of a rogue ally for Daredevil at the back half of this run, and honestly, he's a great character. We have that Blood of the Tarantula special in here as well, which focuses on him and some of his family. That was really well done. We have some more art styles in that comic as well, but that was a really great storyline. As we go throughout the book, there's a bunch of kind of mini storylines as well. Like I said, this isn't an overly long omnibus, but we do get some wonderful storytelling, and I think that Brubaker and Lark are able just to showcase so much just incredible work in such a small amount of time, relatively. I'm not going to comment on every plot point in this book, but a couple more I would like to mention. This omnibus has the introduction of Lady Bullseye, a new villain in the Daredevil mythos at the time. She is inspired by the villain Bullseye, but has no real other connection to him, but she is absolutely honed as kind of a deadly assassin. We have her kind of affiliated with the Hand. That's another whole plot point in this. The Hand is back in New York and has some nefarious plans for a couple targeted individuals. They're looking like they're trying to find a candidate, perhaps. We have someone named Master Izo who comes in, who was the kind of mentor for Stick, who of course mentored Daredevil himself, Matt Murdock. So we have that character showing up. We have some great appearances from characters like Iron Fist, who is kind of also embedded in all this lore with the Hand. So those characters are all really great. I love that we got some ninjas in the back half of this run. I think they're handled really well. I think how Michael Lark adapts the Hand is also just really beautiful. Like when they take them out and they kind of become that green dust, I just think it looks really sharp with what Michael Lark does. Absolutely stunning stuff. With all the Hand storyline, that is where this story kind of culminates, and I won't go into that too much, but I will say during that greater story arc, we also have the return of the Kingpin, Wilson Fisk. We're treated to an incredible issue where we have him kind of trying to pick up the pieces of his own life, find kind of a refuge or a place of happiness in the midst of it all, only to have everything just fall down around him. It's a really tragic and beautiful issue. I think if you're a fan of Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, it's honestly one of my favorite single issues that explores kind of his psyche and who he is as a character and just the darkness that seems to surround him. We also have kind of an uneasy alliance with Kingpin and Daredevil in this book as they try to take down Lady Bullseye and other members of the Hand. Things go just predictably awry with that whole arrangement, but ultimately that leads into this book's climax, which is kind of Daredevil and crew versus the Hand. But how that all shakes out, well, it is pretty surprising, and that leads us right into the Andy Diggle kind of Shadowland Shadowland era. So this Brubaker run is smacked in the middle between the Andy Diggle Shadowland stuff and the Brian Michael Bendis stuff at the front end. So it's really just in an interesting place in the Daredevil world. I really do like it. I really feel overall that the Bendis run is my favorite run on Daredevil, and Ed Brubaker's probably up top 3, top 5 Daredevil runs of all time, which honestly, given the prestige and just the renown of the different people that have written on this book in the last 40, 50 years, that's saying something. But what I love about the Bendis Brewbaker era is that the transition is fairly seamless. These are both incredible writers at the top of their game who clearly understand how to write kind of gritty, street-level crime, vigilante stories, and I just really dug it. Revisiting these pages, I was really blown away by just how much I loved the Brubaker run of Daredevil. And even though I started in my reread with this volume 2, I'm now considering going back and just kind of dabbling in the volume 1 again. Honestly, I love these stories. Now, I've touched on it a little bit, but I've been talking a lot about the storylines, but I do want to spend some time talking about the incredible artwork of Michael Lark. So Brubaker and Lark have teamed up in the past. I'm looking at you, Gotham Central. But anyway, this is a real powerhouse dynamic duo, and I really, really love everything that Lark brings to the pages of Daredevil. He has a really kind of crisp, detailed style. There is a grit even to this art style. I don't think it's as kind of messy as maybe Maleev's is in the Bendis run, which I also absolutely adore. But it still has some of that grit. I really like this kind of cinematic quality to the artwork as well. There are times where you almost feel like you're watching a movie play out, and I mean that in the most complimentary fashion I can. It is really gorgeous, and like I said, maybe Bendis and Brubaker kind of have the voice of Daredevil that feels true to form, but honestly, artists like Alex Maleev and here with Michael Lark, they really have the visual aesthetic I often associate with Daredevil as well. Maybe it's just because how much I love this run, or maybe, like I said about the authors, this is just such a pitch-perfect realization of Daredevil, at least in my mind, and I just was transported to this world, to Hell's Kitchen, looking at the images from Michael Lark. I love how he also drew Matt Murdock, even as much as I loved how he did Daredevil. The action sequences are really, really cool, easy to follow, and just some of the kind of aerial acrobatics we get of Daredevil, where he's almost a silhouette against the sky, that happened a couple points throughout this omnibus, and I love it. I really think it's great. I think a lot of the character expressiveness, it's all really dynamic and interesting. So much of it feels authentic, and having that paired with Brubaker's understanding of characters and what makes them organic, their motivations all line up, and everything just gel. It really feels like you're looking at real people in just a fantastical circumstance. Really, really love it. These two, how they do storytelling, I just really love it. I think it's a real masterclass. Going back to the story a bit, I think that my favorite parts of this volume, this omnibus, were maybe the beginning and the middle of the book. I feel like kind of picking up the pieces of Matt's life in the beginning of this book, and then kind of how he manages to self-destruct again in different ways. That whole period of this book, I think, is really the kind of high point for me. Toward the end, where we start to veer into the hand stuff, while I loved it, I think that we got a lot of great moments in that as well. I think the actual resolution of this omnibus was maybe not my favorite. I actually think the end of the Bendis era was maybe a little more packing a punch, at least for me personally. I don't know if it's because I've shied away from the Shadowland era in the past. I remember not overly loving that period, although I am curious if I were to reread it, if I would look on it a little more favorably. I know recently I actually reviewed Green Arrow Year 1. Yes, it's a DC comic, but that was also by Andy Diggle, who did the Daredevil run after Ed Brubaker's, and I loved it. So much so that it has me almost wanting to reread the Shadowland era of Daredevil. And especially as we transition at the end of this book, I am curious how it would feel after all of these years. Back to this omnibus though, don't get me wrong, the resolution is still deeply satisfying. I still thought it was absolutely great. There's this moment where everything kind of climaxes or crescendos, and it just really pays off a lot of the setup that Brubaker and Lark have been doing for issue upon issue. I just maybe didn't love the actual choice for the turn as much as maybe some others. I still think it was earned. I think it was a great way to end the book, but I do think that this was probably the softest part in the book for me. I just think it was easier to connect with the drama drama that was happening toward the middle and beginning of the book. But it was all still really great, and like I said, if you like the ninja stuff like me, there are still some really high points at the back, like third of this book. And I think having Lady Bullseye as this kind of new mysterious villain really added to some of the intensity and drama and conflict of this book, and overall just really fun stuff. And as we finish out the actual stories and the issues in this book, we are treated to a handful of extras, which is always great to see in a book like this. We essentially have a variant cover art gallery. Everything is reproduced in oversized format. Love to see that. And then we have some kind of behind the scenes sketches or outlined images, things like that. It's not an extensive kind of library of extras, but it's a fair amount. You know, I was happy with it. I wasn't too bothered or anything like that. It's always great to see that at the back of an omnibus. I wish, if anything, we had maybe some essays from some of the creators. I was appreciative that we had the previously on at the beginning, but maybe an afterword or something like that, or maybe something reflecting on the kind of the legacy of these characters. I would have just really enjoyed that myself, but all the art-based extras were certainly a treat. I'll go ahead and just flip through the last little bit of extras we have at the back of this book. Like I said, we do have a fairly healthy amount of these variant covers and just bonus artwork here. It is still nice to see. I do really like it. And it does help pad out an already kind of smaller omnibus. And with that, we go ahead and finish the omnibus itself. Before we go to the grade, I do want to show it next to the reprinted Volume 1 of the Ed Brubaker Omnibus. I know at the time of this recording, this one actually just went out of print, so you might have to find it out of print, maybe used or from secondary markets new, something like that, if you want to pick up the full set, which unfortunately I had to do. I honestly dragged my feet upgrading to the omnibuses of this line, especially because I had it all in paperback, but when Organic Price Books was kind enough to give me a review copy of this Volume 2, I realized it was maybe time to trade in the paperbacks and a couple other things to try to get the Volume 1. Honestly, they look great together on a bookcase, and I'm elated to have this in an upgraded, more prestige format. And I think that's going to go ahead and do it for Daredevil by Ed Brubaker Volume 2, and now all that's left is to give this omnibus a grade. For a wonderful second half to an already incredible comic book run by Ed Brubaker, the Comic Book Report is happy to give Daredevil by Ed Brubaker Omnibus Volume 2 an A. For me, this is an absolute must-read comic book run, and even this Volume 2 by itself, I think it's surprisingly accessible to newer readers as well as returning readers alike. Between the art and the voice of this character, it is pitch-perfect Daredevil in my mind, as well as pitch-perfect Matt Murdock. The supporting cast of characters are all really vibrant and interesting. We have some great fight sequences, some great conflicts, sense of tension, and everything just moves really well. Everything's well-paced. Other than the fact that this omnibus is a bit smaller than some others, I really don't have anything negative to say about this collection. I think it was absolutely well done, and easily Ed Brubaker's run on Daredevil is top tier, top shelf Daredevil. It's hard to go wrong with this guy. But let me know what you think of the Ed Brubaker Daredevil run in the comments. Let me know if you picked up this omnibus or if you haven't. And thank you everyone for watching. Until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to give your like, comment, and maybe share the video with a friend. Thanks so much. Have a good one.